Welcome to Searching Smarter with Selby Jennings, the podcast for hiring managers and professionals navigating the job market within financial sciences and services. Whether you're searching for top talent to grow your team or considering your own career move, this podcast will help you do so with confidence. I'm your host, Jesse Scaff, Global Client Director for Faden International's Financial Sciences and Services brand, Selby Jennings.
Today I'm joined by Carrington Carter, a former client with extensive human resources and talent acquisition leadership experience in industries including financial services, hospitality, and healthcare.
If you're trying to manage 100 people in various stages of the process, you are not going to be successful.
He's done everything from entry-level to executive recruitment, lead groundbreaking DEI initiatives, and oversee M&A and post-HR integration and organizational change design. On today's episode, we'll be addressing the importance of providing a positive candidate experience.
When I think about a positive candidate experience, I think about one that is speedy, it is efficient, and it leaves a candidate feeling as if they have gotten the opportunity to make their best case for the opportunity.
We'll go into how to get top talent excited, keep them engaged, and how all of this can impact your brand's reputation. We also highlight some of the most common pitfalls to a positive candidate experience, such as the grass is greener approach to hiring and lack of internal communication. So if you're looking to have a more fluid application to interview process and make hiring decisions faster, stay tuned. Thanks for being here today, Carrington. I'm really happy. Obviously, you're a friend of the business, and it's good to see you. And obviously, you got some really great insights for us on a broad range of topics. So today, since we'll be specifically talking about the candidate experience and providing a candidate experience, I want to just first kind of open it up broadly. What does a positive candidate experience mean to you, or how would you define the positive candidate experience?
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, Jesse, great to see you. Great to be with you for a little bit this afternoon. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, maybe because in my last role, I led talent acquisition, but it's also been near and dear to my heart throughout my entire career. When I think about a positive candidate experience, I think about one that is speedy, it is efficient, and it leaves a candidate feeling as if they have gotten the opportunity to make their best case for the opportunity, to share their experience, and one where they are kept abreast of where they are in the process, and one that hopefully ends with some meaningful feedback.
Yes to all of the above. Completely agree. And that's something that we're always imploring with our candidates, and oftentimes we use as a tool for feedback even, right? If there are things happen, right? Whether it's a bureaucratic hurdle or somebody goes on vacation or what have you, somebody's out sick, things happen. But namely what we try to do is, for the sake of a positive candidate experience and for providing a positive candidate experience, what can we do to keep the momentum up? How can we add a touch point in something like that? So I know you have, you've kind of laid out a model in your own way. So, something we might call the 3 C's to the positive candidate experience and what have you. So tell me, elaborate a little bit on that and what that means to you.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's because my first name begins with a C, my last name begins with a C, that I like C's, but it helps me keep it simple.
Yes.
It's commitment, collaboration, and communication. And when I'm talking about commitment, it's having all the stakeholders agree that providing a positive candidate experience is important for all the reasons that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And that shows itself with the level of investment that we're prepared to make in technology like ATS systems, surveying tools, and feedback tools. The investment we're prepared to make in acquiring benchmark data to understand what's best in class and how we compare. With regards to collaboration, there I'm really thinking about the hiring manager, operations, talent acquisition, talent management, and there may be others. And this is about having an interactive exchange of ideas that ultimately leads to an agreement about how you're going to proceed. Clarity on what are the skills, competencies, and experiences that are relevant today for this role, not 5 years ago? What's the number of candidates on the slate? What's the number of interviews? Who the interviewers are? What's the time frame? When the requisition expires? You get the gist, right? But it is that upfront dialogue. And the partnership with talent acquisition and the calibration with them is so important because essentially they own the internal pipelines. And oftentimes what will happen is that you've solidified a slate of candidates, good candidates, right? And I make no judgment, but there is now an internal candidate. And so you pause the process, you talk to that candidate or candidates, you assess, and how that connects to that broader candidate experience is that you've had these folks now in queue that believe that they were kind of at the final stages. So that calibration is really important and goes much deeper than the standard intake session. Communication is clearly threaded throughout, but here I am isolating the hiring manager, the talent acquisition professional, and the candidate. And it is about having a regular cadence of communication and connection with a standing agenda to talk about who's in process, who is receiving an offer, who's going to be declined, clarity around who's going to provide feedback and to whom, particularly when there is an internal candidate. And more broadly speaking, providing clarity to that candidate about what they can expect in the process. You know, I had an experience, was asked to consider an organization and they outlined their process. And it was, you're going to apply. You're going to get written questions to respond to. It's going to go to a hiring team. This is who they are. You're going to be asked to participate in a video. After that, there may be more questions. Those are going to be in writing. So you get the gist. It was lengthy. Maybe 10 steps is too much. I don't know. But at least what I understood is that there was going to be an investment of my time. There was going to be X amount of time to get to decision. Ultimately, it wasn't the right thing for me, but it showed respect for me and I respected the process.
That's a really great example of a process. And, you know, I think on our side with candidates specifically, and you touched on so many great points there that I think we could probably talk about for a whole lot longer than we have time allotted here. But, you know, the initial reaction might be, wow, that's a lot. But if the other side of that coin is, would you rather have an interview than wait to find out how it went, only to find out if you're going to be moving forward? And what if that ends up being 8 or 9 interviews? That's when candidates start to feel strung along, right? And that the goalpost continues to move, or that there is no end in sight. Is the organization just fishing? Like, yes, it might have been a lot of steps to that process, but you had a clear understanding from week one what it was going to take to get this position or be considered for this role. And to me, I'm with you. Much more respect for the fact that it was laid out rather than on the fly or, you know, progressive updates reactively, if you will.
And it shows respect for the candidate's time as well, right? Because if you are gainfully employed, you might make a decision to say, yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be able to find time for 10 steps.
It might not be for me. Exactly.
Might not be for me. Exactly.
You mentioned something else earlier about brand reputation. And sometimes from our position, it might even feel like it comes across, and as you say, everything is communication, right? But when we provide this type of feedback, we want to make sure that it's not incendiary or inflammatory, but we don't want to seem like we're threatening our clients, but we need to make them aware, hey, by the way, if you're not going to get back to these candidates, they are going to say something about the fact that they never heard back from you, or they are going to say something about that interview. Sure, it was difficult, but that person was really unpleasant or was on their phone the whole time. So making sure that your interviewers are engaged and making sure that you are providing feedback in some form of a timely manner is entirely impactful to your own brand reputation as a client. So, you know, you touched on that earlier, and I just wanted to bring that back because I think that's also such a good point and something that we try to remind our clients of as well, because yes, everyone's busy and they're not just interviewing one candidate at a time for across the entire organization, but the more touch points, the better you can preserve your own brand reputation and go on to provide that positive candidate experience.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on, because I think sometimes when we think about the candidate experience, we kind of think, well, HR, or more specifically, the talent acquisition professional, internal or external, own it. And it really is a shared responsibility, right? And to your example, if you have a candidate that's waiting for feedback or has a bad experience, particularly in some of these geographies where you are hiring for multiple roles with a specific set of skills, that individual has a network, right, that they're talking to. They may have peers that are also applying. So the risks, I think, are considerable if you think about the importance of your brand.
Sometimes the feedback may not be immediate because the hiring team may sit there and think, I like that candidate, but do I love them? Are they a 10 out of 10 slam dunk? Can they do the job today? I want to talk about for a second, maybe hiring an 8 out of 10 candidate or even a 7 out of 10 candidate for a couple of reasons, right? Number one, oftentimes it does seem like, that hiring committee, especially if it may be somebody new to hiring or who hasn't hired in a while, taking the grass is greener type approach, right? I like that candidate, but I think that there might be better out there. Or secondly, I want to hire the 10 out of 10 candidate because that person can do the job today. And I'm always wary of that because if the candidate can do a 10 out of 10 job today, where's the candidate's learning curve, right? They still want to be challenged. So tell me where you stand or where you land on the, grass is greener type approach, the 8 out of 10 versus 10 out of 10, and still providing a learning curve while being obviously adept and beyond efficient at the job.
I think the challenge with taking the grass is greener approach and the next and the next and the next is that you can really draw out a process and potentially lose that candidate that's an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, or a 10 out of 10 because you want to continue to see more people. And I think about it also just from a business perspective. If you are dragging the process out with this grass is greener approach, and you don't have clarity on what are the most important skills, competencies, experiences that a person needs to have, there is also a negative impact to the business in terms of that seat being vacant, right? So is there an impact? Exactly. Are there costs that we haven't considered, particularly in these revenue generating sales roles for
very much so
a seat just sitting empty? So I think that's the biggest challenge with the grass is greener. And I think in my experience, whether it's been in healthcare, hospitality, or financial services, what has helped is the communication piece up front to say, this is the time frame that we're going to recruit. This is the optimal number of folks that we're going to present on an initial slate. And in some instances where I found it to be helpful to negate that grass is greener approach is that once a hiring manager has seen X amount of candidates, fill in the blank, and they can't make a decision, what's the escalation? Is there a head for that business that says, you know what, I want to be the tiebreaker? And what that has done, it has shrunk the amount of time. It's kept us to a manageable number of candidates. It has also given that candidate an additional touch point in the opportunity. And sometimes in the organization, and sometimes what comes back is, not only do I want us to proceed with this candidate, but I want us to find a home for that second candidate. Let's get an additional requisition open.
If only it always worked out like that.
Oh, well, yeah.
But I completely agree, right? There's a home for a good candidate. And absolutely, I think what's underestimated a lot is that the cost associated, whether it's the man hours and time cost or the actual cost, right? Specifically, if we're referring to financial services, you might be losing out on trading opportunities, M&A opportunities, or even in the back office, those individuals who need to support the high frequency with which these, or high frequency or speed with which, the financial services industry moves, there's a cost per day, and it ain't pennies to not have these roles filled. So agree, entirely that the grass is greener approach is usually does more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
Quick pivot around, not just the grass is greener, which obviously prolongs things, but how might we keep the momentum up in a process? Or how do we not lose momentum in a process? How many touch points should that be? Even if the hiring team is maybe working in between, what does the next step look like? Or if somebody's away for a couple of weeks or what have you, how do you keep up momentum to make sure that the candidate stays engaged?
A couple of ways. And the one thing I want to say even before I answer this question is there's another reality that talent acquisition professionals face today, and that's the AI-enabled technology for applications, the easy apply button, which are all great tools for the top of the funnel, right? For amassing candidates. But unless you have an equally innovative technology-enabled solution to screen and select, or people to do that with your recruiter, it creates a really challenging environment for talent acquisition professionals. And I know that from experience. So I think the first thing to think about in terms of how do you ensure that you're staying on pace, you have good momentum, is that you've got to have a manageable candidate slate, right? And I think that's why it's important to say up front, it's going to be 3, it's going to be 6 versus 100. Because let's face it, if you're trying to manage 100 people in various stages of the process, you are not going to be successful, most likely. So I think keeping the number manageable, managing expectations up front, right? And I've seen some organizations do it really well, even with their ATS processes, where you apply and the first note that you get is that if your skills and experiences align with what we're looking for, you're going to hear from us in 24 hours. Right? If we think that you're a good candidate, we're going to look to move you to interview within the next 7 days. So whatever your time frame is,
that can be automated. That does not take human effort to do. As you talk about, AI and the automation of recruiting, if the AI reads that the process or the profile of the candidate is good enough to move forward, just generate a message that puts in someone's inbox, and that could be touch point number 1 that keeps them engaged.
Absolutely. And Jesse, I think this is where it goes back to that first C of commitment, right? Because if everyone agrees that this is important, then what follows is the requisite investment in the technology that helps support that process. And you're right, that automation is a real good way to set expectations and to ensure that you're keeping the momentum going.
On the AI or touch point element that we've been talking about, let's talk about the human element of it, right? And how much of it maybe has been lost, or how much of it should be maintained, to look at it another way, right? As you mentioned, there's the capability for a single candidate to send 1,000 resumes in a day to 1,000 companies. And we kind of touched on this in our first episode, the one specifically about AI in recruiting. And to counteract that, organizations are using automation to filter the CVs. How much of the human element of recruiting, given what we're recruiting is people, how much of the human element is being lost when that kind of thing happens? And sure, when you submit a CV, the AI or the technological program that you're using can read what the CV is providing, but they can't read between the lines. They can't understand who a human being might be. So do you have any thoughts on the human element of recruiting and if we're maintaining or losing it in this automated age?
Yeah, I have many thoughts. And I think at the end of the day, it really is a decision that each organization has got to make, right? each organization has got to think through how important it is to maintain that human element, how important it is to create an emotional connection in that process. And then I think that drives how much you leverage automated approaches to do that. And what makes me think about that, Jesse, is the relationship with an employee doesn't start on day one or day two of an orientation, right? It is the first introduction to that organization when I hit apply, when I have a conversation.
Brand reputation.
It's the brand reputation. So if that connectivity, that early engagement is important, then I think you want to see more of a human element. And that human element is, and I don't believe it can be for everybody, right? But for your slate of candidates, whether that's 6, 8, 10, you choose, that those folks can have a live conversation to say, we're interested. They can receive an email, a text from a person that says, we're interested. This is, 3 to 4 days, you're going to hear from us. Something like that. Because I think the other reality is that anyone who is interacting with an organization has a smartphone. They're on all the social platforms, they're tweeting. So they also have an expectation that this is going to be automated. It's going to be somewhat impersonal for them.
Especially,
make sense?
Yes, of course. Especially at the beginning stages and at the front end of the experience. Right. I think I want to take a moment to just acknowledge what you and I are talking about today is kind of like the perfect process, right? A utopic view of what the candidate experience might or should look like if everything was perfect, right? Mm-hmm. So call it what it is. Things happen, and as I mentioned, red tape is in play. People get sick. People go on vacation, and there are confusions and there are just reasons why things get skipped. That's going to happen,
right?
I think what we're trying to say, is where possible, these are some things to implement or improve your best practice standard. And for the candidate side, I think, we're talking about mass submissions. If you're applying to a smaller company, chances are that if their HR and talent acquisition functions are smaller and they receive categorically smaller numbers of applications, smaller volumes of individual applications, you'll probably hear back from an individual. But if you're applying to the global investment banks or the world's leading hedge funds that, interview 1% of their applicants, never mind hire, it is fair to say that you might not hear back every single time, just to defend those clients.
No, absolutely. And I think it is situational. But I think whether you're a small shop or a global shop, you can still follow the process of being committed, collaborating, and deciding what level of communication you want to have with those individuals, right? Because look, I think this is the other reality, that what happens that I think sometimes as a candidate, you don't appreciate for the talent acquisition professional, right? And so I've always reminded folks that, let's remember that while there are a lot of administrative activities, right, and a lot of rules and regulations and reporting, the talent acquisition's primary goal is to identify talent to present to the hiring manager from which the decision, right? That's it. But behind that, there may be a whole host of things, in my experience, that has occurred. Multiple moving pieces. It could be there is an organizational change, a functional change. There is a change in the budget. There is a change in the timeline. It is moving from remote to hybrid to office, right? It is the surprise internal candidate that's been introduced. Or some organizations have made the decision that they're not going to disposition, release those candidates, those primary candidates, until they've extended an offer, it's been accepted, there's been a background check, and there's a start date. So that could also create quiet for that interested candidate.
Most definitely. And there's an element to onboarding. This would be an entirely separate topic and episode. But the onboarding, post interview, post offer, making sure that the candidate starts, completes their background, shows up to work on time, knows where their desk is, knows where their laptop is, all of that. That's also part of the candidate experience, but what we might call post-placement care. That'll be a topic for a later day.
Awesome.
So if we're going to look under the hood for a second for the candidates, and obviously given your wealth of experience on the internal side, if you're going to defend the internal recruiter for a second, right? And the candidate who's saying, I haven't heard back in this long, or I interviewed yesterday, why do you not have feedback for me, or whatever that might be, right? What's something that you can share that might happen internally just to kind of explain, hey, we're working on it, our apologies, just give us a moment here, but we will, we are doing our best and we will be looking to get back to you as soon as possible.
There are a couple of things. One, if a candidate hasn't received a response in a reasonable amount of time, it may simply be that candidate is not going to progress to the final stages, right? And I think in my experience, it is always better to be candid with a candidate that's been maybe waiting for a bit to say that as you've gone through this process and the hiring manager is going through their levels of assessment, you believe that you've probably narrowed it down to kind of your top 2 or 3. So for that candidate, if they haven't heard, to make a commitment to say by the end of whatever period makes sense, we can talk about kind of where you've placed in this process and your future interest with the organization. That sometimes is beneficial. The other reality is sometimes that the candidate may not have heard back because there is another priority, right, that is suddenly more important than filling that seat. It could be that the hiring manager, look, we all have someone that we have to report into. There may be a person that says that they want some insight, right? They want to lean in. That could be the process. And sometimes it is you've worked with a candidate and, to your point, they're 10-10 plus, and that you're contemplating some organizational changes where that candidate may be an ideal candidate for a larger role, right? So there could be some organizational things that are happening as well.
It all comes down to communication. And look, we preach the same things here internally, and I'm always talking to our consultants when the client asks, why have we not seen any CVs from you or something like that, or what's the latest with this candidate? The update is that there is no update. That's a perfectly acceptable mode of communication. You can't overuse it, for a month straight, but where sometimes you got to keep people warm, and sometimes you got to make them aware that there's some things going on internally, bear with us. But on occasion, it's okay to play that card.
Because it is true that sometimes there is no update. Now, what I have found, particularly with, and your firm has been great in this, is, having an agreement around the regular cadence for communication, whether it is once a week, every other week, so that you have a time frame within in which you're working. And sometimes on that, second Tuesday, there are no updates because, to your point, we don't have the right resumes, right? So I think even in those cases, no update, having a plan to communicate regularly helps with some of that. Not all of it, of course.
Not always, and not all of it. But sometimes, sometimes the update is that there is no update, but sometimes it's better just to close the loop because of uncertainty than to just string along or leave somebody hanging. So, again,
absolutely.
Same page there. So I got one more point just to close out, but first I want to talk about our little topic that we've addressed today, and a little segment that we're doing now underhyped or overhyped? You tell me what your opinion on this topic is. It underhyped or overhyped? The candidate experience and providing a white glove service to each candidate for the candidate experience is underhyped or overhyped?
Generally speaking, whether it's been healthcare, hospitality, or financial services, I think the candidate care experience by and large is underhyped, right? And look, that could have had something to do with different time periods and supply and demand, whatever it is. I think it's been underhyped. Where I think in my experience, it is typically at the right level, somewhere between underhyped and overhyped, is if you are involved, as I was in hospitality and financial service, in, let's say, campus recruiting or early talent recruitment, because there you understand that if you seek talent on at a college or a university and you start this relationship and you mess it up, you are potentially damaging your relationship with that university, the pipeline for interns and early talent. So I think in those spaces, they have it right? They understand just the right balance and just the right level of touch points with an associate. White glove service, I think, is at the discretion of every organization and probably not for every position and every level. There may be some
Most
roles
definitely.
that have unique
Subjective.
skills, highly compensated, highly specialized, where white glove services probably makes the most sense.
I think you're right there. Maybe the white glove service itself doesn't fully encompass the positive candidate experience, right? And as we discussed, there might be some clients, that feel, or some organizations, I should say, that feel that candidates want to work for them so badly that they don't have to provide the best experience, right? Those might be the top names in the street or the ones that are the most competitive and what have you. And candidate experience might be overhyped, right?
Yeah, I will say this, Jesse. There's one other thing that I've seen, and it's been happening over the past couple of years, but organizations, and I won't name names, have gotten really good at it. So it is the automated notification of what you can expect if your skills, experiences, competencies align. But there are also kind of these automated responses. Once you've gone through an interview process, you're not selected, and there's an invitation to become a part of that organization's talent network, where you are then automatically sent links for jobs for which you might be qualified. Now, look, I think it requires maybe a different definition of white glove service, but what that does is definitely, in my view, preserves that candidate's experience, shows respect for their time, respect for their skills and experiences, and you have probably won a brand advocate if they elect to stay connected as a part of your talent network.
Yes. And for that reason, generally, providing a positive candidate experience is an underhyped topic, and one that everyone can aim to improve even just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Next, other than searching smarter, of course, tell me a podcast you're listening to.
Oh, okay. So, so I would say How Leaders Lead with Dave Novak is one that I've been listening to recently.
Great. And tell me a book that you are reading or have recently read.
So a book that I am in the middle of is called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. I think that's his name. And let me tell you why. There were two quotes that I saw as I was perusing, and it was, one, we are all in the business of serving other people. That's number one. That struck me, my hospitality healthcare
I love
background.
that line.
And two, he made the distinction between service, which I think we all provide, and hospitality. And hospitality is about how you make people feel. And that is a great tie-in when we think about the positive candidate experience. And I'd love to take credit for the book, but actually it was posted on Deshaunda Brown Duckett's LinkedIn page, the CEO for TIAA. And so I picked it up, and it's a great read. I'm about 2/3 way through.
There's a line I love who his name is Bobby Stuckey. He's a restaurateur out in Colorado, and he's actually like one of the 250 top sommeliers, like master sommeliers in the world. But he has a phrase called hospitalians. And
I like that.
yes. And obviously the restaurant industry is all about hospitality. And those who exemplify hospitality. And, what was the line that you said from the book?
Hospitality is about how you make people feel.
Yes. So anyone who exemplifies that, or anybody who really embodies and lives and breathes how you make people feel, is a hospitalian. And his point is that doesn't necessarily have to apply to the restaurant industry. As we've proven today, it applies to providing a positive candidate experience, and it can apply to recruitment and just your day-to-day life as much as anything. So
Absolutely.
Just wanted to give that little plug. I've heard it once before. The first time I heard it, it really stuck with me. Yeah, so that's really it for me. I think, I hope today for those listening, we were able to, over the course of our conversation, lay out and set out a little playbook for those who are trying to improve an internal recruitment system, or, be a hospitalian and show how much you care about others through human interaction and providing a positive candidate experience. So thanks for that. And before I let you go,
Sure.
tell me what's next for Carrington Carter.
Look, I have loved participating in events like these. I've enjoyed working closely with my mentees, doing some consulting. But ultimately, what my goal is to land a VP level HR generalist role or above in the Philadelphia area that allows me to leverage my experience and love for talent acquisition, my leadership of DE&I, my serving as a business partner, consultant, internal advisor to executives and beyond. So using all the things that are in my toolkit, that's my goal.
I can tell you, from our experience of working with you, obviously your breadth of experience across numerous industries and most recently in financial services, we here at Faden are pretty confident that you'll find something real soon. So thanks
Awesome.
again.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of Searching Smarter. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Until next time, keep searching smarter.